This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com.
Let's give you a sort of a peek into the mind of Bret Hart. He writes of this match that he had been training as hard as he had for this as anything else. He said, quote, Shawn was 8 years younger than me, and I wasn't going to let him outshine me. Like me and Davey at Wembley, I wanted the fans to remember the loser. I saw a matchup ahead with me taking back the title, which would build up for yet one more match where I'd be more than happy to put Shawn over, to once and for all thrust the torch into his hand. Done right, Shawn and I could draw money for years with a big rivalry, taking turns putting each other over. Doesn't everyone sort of assume that that's the plan when you head into WrestleMania 12, that this is our new great rivalry? Maybe like Macho Man and Hulk Hogan before, or from your side of things, maybe it could be the new Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat.
Yeah. Or, the Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier. There are a lot of illustrations there, that we could utilize, but yeah, that was the deal. Because you got two great stars that had really the contrary at that time. They didn't have great chemistry outside the ring, but I always thought that, Bret and Shawn complimented the hell out of each other. I enjoyed their matches. I enjoyed their interactions. So, but that was obviously the thought. This is not going to be a one-off. We're building this amazing rivalry that we can revisit, just about any time with the proper reintroduction.
Let's keep it moving and run you through what he's doing as we get into March. On March 3rd, he beats the Bulldog, in Springfield, Mass. Later in the show, Bret would beat Shawn in a lumberjack match. The next day in Providence, same thing. On March 5th, we would see Bret beat Shawn in a lumberjack in Austin, Texas. On the 11th, they're in San Antonio for a television taping. Bret would beat Tatanka, and then later Bret would beat The Undertaker by countout. In Hartford, 4 days later, Undertaker would team with Bret to take on Shawn and Diesel, which is a little interesting. It is tough. And we should mention that, at the time of this, Bret is 38, Shawn is 30. And don't get me wrong, Bret had a lot of long matches with Flair and Owen, and Shawn had a lot of long tag matches, but this is going to be another level. And a week before the big match, Bret goes on the Chet Kopic Sports Talk show and said if he loses this match, he's going to consider retiring. Is this another wrinkle for Vince to add to the promotion? It feels like Vince really loves this idea, especially around WrestleMania. He did it with Hogan around WrestleMania 8. So 4 years later, he's going to tease, hey, if I don't win, I might retire.
Yeah. Good wrinkle. Another good log on the fire to keep building that blaze and that, the heat, no pun intended, from the fire. Nice. I thought it was good. To me, Bret, I don't think Bret had any thought seriously of retiring, but it sounded good and it was feasible. He'd had a long career. He had a great run as champion. What other mountains can I climb that I haven't already? So I thought it was a nice wrinkle, as you put it, to add to this, storyline.
We should mention that, Meltzer takes note of something that I think is worth discussing. He writes, the Iron Man match in a sense shows a 180-degree change in the WWF's philosophy from the first WrestleMania back in 85 to in 1996. The company is putting arguably its two best in-ring performers and putting them in the situation to have a classic match. This is a shift. You go back and you look and it's always Hulk Hogan and somebody. And then we tried to have a bit of a departure with 10. We made Bret, but we've still got Yokozuna and Lex Luger in the mix. And then we fast forward to 11 and we're going celebrity. We're going Bam Bam Bigelow and Lawrence Taylor. But now at 12, really, you've arguably got two of the very best wrestlers in the world, and we're giving them an hour to do their thing. This is a lot less, to use a JR saying or expression, a lot less sizzle, a lot more steak. Was Vince nervous about the shift? I mean, he's always been King Sizzle.
Yeah. He was a little, uncertain how it was going to work out, but going back to that, you always know that they're going to have, Bret and Shawn are going to have a great match. And that's at the end of the day, that's the obligation of any promoter, of any company, is to create matches that the fans are going to enjoy because of their application from bell to bell. You obviously got to get a good build up. You got to tell a good story. You got to get us to the water, and then the horse is supposed to drink when it gets there. So I think Vince was probably a little bit uneasy, uncertain, because how is our, again, as I said earlier, how is our audience going to react to 60 minutes? Guaranteed 60 minutes. So, yeah, I think so. But again, the solace was the fact that you knew at the end of the day, those two sons of guns are going to have a hell of a wrestling match, and the fans are going to enjoy it.
Let's get to the match. It's March 31st, Anaheim, California. Bret said earlier in the day of WrestleMania, he found Shawn at lunchtime and they sat down and planned out the match. Bret let Shawn piece out the first 25 minutes and then Bret did the rest. He said all told, they sat for 3 hours planning everything out. And Bret told him, I'll expect to be working a rematch when I come back in 6 months. And, Bret said that Shawn spent much of the morning planning a special entrance, being lowered to the ring by a steel cable. And Bret would write, I was impressed by how focused he was. He says, as WrestleMania goes on, many of the boys with tears in their eyes found him to thank him, as was custom in this era when the belt's about to change hands. If you carried the belt with dignity and worked hard, was that always a tradition? And when do you remember this being the last time that it happened, that guys would come by and thank the former champion when he's dropping the title? It doesn't seem like something that happens these days, maybe from a more bygone era.
Yeah, it was from a bygone era when things were a little bit more traditional. And I often wonder today how much a championship actually means to current wrestling talent, because they don't get a chance to get comfortable in their role that often. The short tenure of some of the championships, I think, lessens the importance of the title when titles change indiscriminately and much too often. So, but back in the old days, that was not the case. Frequent title changes were what you wanted to always promote on at live events. You know, people bought tickets to see Ric Flair on the road as the NWA champion because they hoped that their guy in their territory would have the upset of the decade, and their guy would become the NWA champion. So they were paying money to see Flair lose. And I say that respectfully to Rick. I mean, Rick knew his role. So Rick would always go in there and make these guys look better than they were, come within a hair, hog's breath, eyelash, whatever cliche you want to use, of losing the title, but somehow or another through DQs, countouts, whatever, he always retained in that respect. So the local guy never beat Flair, but that was what they sold tickets on, the promise or the prospect of that happening. So I'm sure Pat Patterson had a big hand in that. Pat was a big fan of Shawn and Bret, quite frankly, both guys. Pat really loved those guys for different reasons. Pat was a sizzle guy himself, even though a great wrestler. But Pat, did a lot of things that were unique and new in his era, as far as his style and the bumps he took, things of that nature. Patterson was a great bump taker. Shawn Michaels was a great bump taker. But he also loved the stability of Bret. And when you got a talent like Patterson looking at Bret with such reverent terms, it's because Pat knew that in another era, that if he was going to wrestle Bret Hart, that he knew one thing: no matter what the finish is going to be, that the match is going to be tremendous. And again, I go back to this Iron Man match. I didn't call that match, but I watched every second of it, and I had a little dog in the hunt because I did the videos with Bret, his training videos, and I was a big fan of both guys' work. And I was curious to see how they're going to pull off a 60-minute match in Los Angeles early in the afternoon because of the time difference, how that was all going to work out. So, but Patterson, I'm sure, had a hand in keeping peace in the valley to some degree, and keep the guys focused on their task at hand. And if they sat together for 3 hours, you knew that both guys' head was in the game, and Patterson was only there to keep the rudder in the water and keep them sailing in the right direction.
Of course, the match is, some would say a masterpiece. Others have a different take. Shawn beats Bret in overtime, 1-0. They go 61 minutes and 52 seconds. So they go just over the limit here to win the world title in a historic Iron Man match. Meltzer would write, Michaels did a flying hurricane rana off the middle ropes, but it was messed up. He went for a drop kick off the top, but Hart caught his legs and got him in the sharpshooter with 34 seconds left. Michaels held out until the end without submitting. Hart left with the belt, but Gorilla Monsoon tells the ref to restart the match with a sudden death stipulation, which had never previously been advertised.
That was a mistake, by the way. We should have advertised that eventuality. In the case of this match going a time limit draw, the match will continue with an untimed overtime period, and the first man to score that pinfall is going to leave as the champ. We didn't, that was not explained well. And I think that was a mistake looking back at it in hindsight.
Meltzer would write, the pop for that announcement was shockingly tepid. In the overtime, Michaels immediately hit 2 super kicks and got the pin in 1 minute and 52 seconds and celebrated in the ring for several minutes afterwards, nearly choking up. In the celebration, Michaels did a Ken Shamrock by kissing Helen Hart and hugging Bret's son Blade. Bret walked out of the ring at the finish. Rather than doing a symbolic in-ring passing of the torch, he gave it 4.25 stars. What'd you think of the match? Did you agree with Meltzer's assessment? 4.25? Where would you rank it?
Oh, right there. It was a hell of a match. I enjoyed it, but I enjoy pro wrestling. Right. I enjoy watching guys wrestle and not try to cram, 3 pounds of shit in a 2-pound bag.
Right.
They had time. They took their time. They told a great story. That's probably all the matches that I did not call. The 2 things that come to my mind are Mick Foley's first title win. I was off with Bell's palsy when Foley won his first championship. I'd love to have called that, and I would love to call this match. But I think it fit my skill set better than it fit Vince's skill set, quite frankly.
Let's mention that Bret wrote about this. He says, with 5 minutes remaining, I hoisted him up like a sack of cement and snapped him across my knee. I smiled at the time clock. I told Shawn the last 5 minutes were all his and we were right on schedule. I leaped off the second rope only to be jolted by a vicious stiff boot to the jaw from Shawn, then one potato after another. He took every liberty he could, stiffing me on drop kicks and elbow smashes. Even so, we both knew the match was a masterpiece. This had been a beautiful movie to watch, especially since the crowd loved us both by the end of it. It was probably the greatest match I ever had, or close anyway. I squeezed Shawn's wrist to give him the cue that we were going home, and this ending, the better man would lose. After the match was over, Bret said, I couldn't believe my ears when I heard Shawn angrily tell Earl, tell him to get the fuck out of the ring. This is my moment. I had firmly placed the torch in that little monster's hands, but I also knew that no one was going to forget about me. With my head held high, I walked to my waiting Lincoln and burned rubber up the ramp as the credits rolled.
Wow.
Man.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I mean, you go back and there is footage, that you can actually see, Shawn says something to that effect, but the gist is the F-bomb and get out of my ring.
Yeah.
And something that I don't think a lot of people really paid attention to at the time is in that last 5 minutes, Bret's accusing Shawn of taking some liberties and throwing some potatoes. Overall, when it's said and done, what do you remember? Were Pat and Vince, everybody pleased with the match?
I think so. No one was happy that Bret was so distressed. Certainly Shawn saying what he said to Earl Hebner, the referee, was uncalled for. It was immature, and it didn't show the respect of the guy that just put the title on you. I didn't like that part of it. Now that I'm reading about it and hearing about it, unnecessary. It just showed, Shawn was again, we said earlier, 30 years old, man, top of the world, he's got that attitude, and you can either love and embrace that attitude that I'm the best ever. And I'm the right guy for this role. I'm going to bring sizzle that Bret Hart didn't in Shawn's view. So it didn't shock me to hear this. It doesn't shock me to hear this, but it's still disconcerting that it was very ill-timed. And the sensitivities of Bret took great pride in being the top guy. All those years he worked in tag teams with Jim the Anvil and all those things, his years toiling in the territory in Calgary, he finally became the top guy in the top territory, the top company in the entire world. And so he took pride in that. And so to be disrespected at his most sensitive moment was very, very ill-timed on Shawn's part. So, and that's not good to hear that. I'm glad. It's just Shawn's lucky that if he's throwing those potatoes, as Bret wrote in his book, which I have no reason to doubt, he's just very lucky that Bret didn't retaliate, and because Shawn could not handle Bret in that type of world. So it showed great character and integrity by Bret Hart to not lose his cool when he's getting stiffed.
We should mention that this is where the lines start to get blurred, because like we talked about after the match, Bret left the ring without shaking Shawn's hand. He basically walked right out of the arena
But
and left.
He told him he was going to, but Shawn, sorry, Conrad, but Bret told Shawn in that three-hour meeting what he was going to do.
That's exactly
I'm not
right.
going to shake your hand.
They planned it that way. They're basically wanting to work everyone, including the boys. And many of the boys felt like Bret leaving the way he did in his gear into a Lincoln right after was a shoot. And there had to be some sort of real life heat between them, some sort of hatred. And Bret said the next day at Raw, Owen would call him from the building and tell Bret, everyone thinks there's so much heat between you and Shawn because you wouldn't shake his hand. And Bret writes that he told Owen something like, that's the best thing in the world, and keep everyone thinking that. So we're trying to quote unquote work the boys. Are you in favor of that?
No problem, because the boys have big mouths.
Right.
And they like to add things. They like to embellish and add stuff that's not even factual. It keeps everybody guessing. It's what the business was built on over the course of time, the uncertainty. I remember when I got in the business and Bill Watts finally smartened me up after I'd already refereed several matches. I wasn't even smart to the business when I started refereeing because they wanted to make sure I was going to stick around for a while. And here, 40-something years later, I didn't disappoint them. I did stick around a while. But yeah, it's what you wanted. You wanted the boys. I asked the point about Watts. I said, well, aren't the title matches real? And he laughed in my face. He said, no. That's the day he told me the most powerful weapon in wrestling was the eraser.
Well, I tell you, Bret feels like when he comes back and they eventually have the return match, it's going to be red hot. In other words, if the boys believe, then the fans would definitely believe it. And
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.